Okay, we are live.
Hello, GMAT Club. Apologies for the slight delay. My name is Paul Lanzelotti. I am the founder of Amerasia Consulting Group. More importantly, I've been consulting, admissions consulting with MBA applicants for about probably 15 or 16 years, since about 2006. Anyway, so I've worked with hundreds of applicants at this point to all sorts of top programs and then a few zany ones as well. So that's to give you some perspective so you know where I'm coming from with a lot of this stuff. It's been, I guess, time and battle tested. And it really, I'm trying to be as pragmatic as possible and make sure that every single person who's attending today actually gets something out of this presentation, something tangible that you can use. Anyway, moving on. First off, for shits and gigs, as they say, I just want everybody to know, every applicant, client, whoever, you always have to consider who your audience is, right? You're not writing these things for your mom or your dad or your best friends, of course, not even for yourself. It's not necessarily when you're applying to business school about what you want to say in your essays or even what you want to do. That may sound strange. What I'm trying to get across is you have to know who's actually reading these things. And you have to know what their constraints are and what keeps them up at night, in other words. And there are so many, as you can see on this chart, so many things that they have to consider. Now, we're not going through every single one, of course, because it wouldn't be relevant, but you need to try and assess how well you fit the profile of everyone going to their school. And beyond that, so you may be a fit on paper, but beyond that, you have to try and convince the admissions committee that you actually have something to bring. So beyond just getting over the bar of are you qualified based on your pedigree, work experience, test scores, GPA, you have to demonstrate fit in terms of what you bring to the table. So it's kind of a yin yang type thing. You'll often see this with essays from different schools. Like Wharton's a good example. They'll ask you in essay one, what are your goals and why Wharton, right? What do you hope to gain professionally through the Wharton MBA is what they ask. And then in essay two, they'll say, this past year they asked pretty much what you bring to the community, how you plan on getting involved beyond learning in the classroom, more or less. So the first essay is kind of selfish, where you're trying to tell them this is what I extract. The second essay is more of, more altruistic in what you will contribute, right? So there's that yin yang. Anyway, that being said, the number one most important thing, and what I advise all my clients to start with, is you have to, even before you want to apply to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, or whatever illustrious school is out there, you have to start building a realistic school shortlist, right? You can always throw a few aspirational plays in there, the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world. But really, once, most applicants, most clients, they pretty much know they want to apply to the top 5, top 7, top 10. But within that, right, within that set of top 10, top 15 programs, you really have to start with the employment report. You have to start with who is graduating and what jobs are they getting. And that, my friends, is really assuming the admissions committee point of view, because if you know anything about these folks that sit on admissions committees for the most part, it's very much trying to let in students, who will contribute and are fit, but that will actually get jobs and that recruiters want to see, right? I cannot underestimate how important this step is, because I cannot underemphasize how much these stats of students that are graduating, what jobs they're getting 3 months after graduation, how much that rules the roost and how that also affects rankings, in other words. So anyway, so the first filter that everyone should be doing, once you kind of have a general idea of here are the 8 or 10 schools I want to pursue or dig into, check the employment report. It's the first filter. It's going to be a PDF on everybody, on each school's website, or a nice fancy graphic on a web page. And you want to go there and you really want to see, okay, I think I might want to be a consultant, or maybe my only choice is to be a consultant or a banker based on my experience, let's say. But is this a school that pumps out consultants or bankers, right? If not, move on. No matter how much you think you love Booth because your mom went there, your dad went there, your brother went there, or sister, if they aren't minting MBAs that are in your target industry or what you want to do in the future, then it's best to start to move on, right? Now, here's the thing. It's a little bit of a chicken or an egg situation here, because you may want to and may need to tailor your goals. So maybe you had your heart set on nonprofit consulting with Dahlberg or Bridgespan or something like that, right? But and maybe you have some relevant consulting experience, pre-MBA. But what I would say, if that school does not, if Dahlberg or Bridgespan, according to the employment reports and also LinkedIn, and we'll get into that in a second, if they don't say that, if the Dahlberg or Bridgespan isn't hiring there, then don't say that those are the potential firms. And in fact, if you don't see any social sector consultancies, pure plays like Dahlberg and Bridgespan hiring, then move the freak on. And you can also see that reflected as an extension in the classes and types of people that are going there. But don't force fit your goal into something that's going to make the admissions committee look at you and say, oh, nice guy, nice gal, nice stats, impressive undergraduate experience and work experience, but batshit crazy goals. This person obviously doesn't know why they need an MBA. They don't know even why they would need this school, but yet they're willing to commit a couple $100,000 to it. It doesn't make sense, right? So anyway, and the other thing too is, and this is the most important pragmatic filter you'll run into, right? So anyway, what else here on this slide? Again, it doesn't matter if you think, because I get clients initially who say, well, I can make this jump. I know I can. I have it in me. I've always achieved things, even though people said I couldn't, or overcome some obstacles. And that's great, right? But you have to understand that you're not making it any easier on the admissions committee, right? So if it comes down to you versus somebody else who has a similar background but more relevant goals, guess who's on the bubble, right? Guess who's, when the music stops, who doesn't have a chair? It's going to be you, or anybody who just doesn't get what the admissions committee has to struggle with, what they consider, what their job's like, what keeps them up at night. And again, that's why I put up that first slide in the beginning with that big flow chart. Anyway, all right, so moving on. So the other great resource that I always emphasize, and full disclosure, I own no stock in LinkedIn or Microsoft, but LinkedIn is a gold mine for determining, what is realistic and what is not. So once you kind of know that, well, there's a lot of investment bankers being hired out of Columbia or NYU or whatever, you got to be even more specific than that, right? To differentiate yourself. Now, remember, goals, I always say this, goals, you don't want to differentiate yourself by saying, I want to be a rodeo clown upon graduation with my MBA, right? That's a ridiculous differentiation that a school can't help you with, right? And that probably is obvious to everyone. But goals essays, you want to run with the herd in general, right? Now, within that paradigm, you want to, distinguish yourself a little bit, right? So when you start looking at LinkedIn, what I'm asking you to do here in the initial stages is to pretty much go and try to find a critical mass, whatever that is. Product manager for Amazon, right? How many can you find? If that's what you think you want to do, or what you can do, or your general direction, how many people have graduated in recent years? Let's say the last 5 years with that, right? Could be 3, could be 30, whatever it may be, that you have to find that. And let's say it's not Amazon. Let's say it's Rakuten or the old buy.com, right? Then fine. Say that name, right? Keep that name in your list, in your head, for future use in an essay, right? So it doesn't have to be Amazon. Maybe it's some Amazon competitor. It doesn't have to be product management in technology. Maybe it's for a technology company. Maybe it's in some other industry, right? Where you could get that product management role if that was your post MBA goal / favor, right? Anyway, so try to find as many as you can. If you're not finding them on LinkedIn, and I have a whole other presentation, by the way, on how to search LinkedIn and how to mine it. But if you're not finding it on LinkedIn, maybe it's because your search skills are whack or weak. Well, maybe it's because these people simply don't exist, right? And that should be another clue as to, okay, tweak your goal or change schools, right? And sometimes you got to meet in the middle, right? Where you keep the same school, but you have to tweak the goal a bit, right? And that's where you come into transferable skills. And I don't want to dive too deep into kind of the analysis of one's background or the articulation of transferable skills for an essay or in an interview with the admissions committee. Anyway, so that's another presentation. So anyway, try to find a good mix of first-year students, second-year students, young alumni. And again, past 4, 5, 6 years, schools change, industries change. Actually, industries change and then schools start to change. But basically, just know that the hiring trend may not be relevant. So try to find younger alumni, more current recruiters, more current companies that are hiring. All right. Also consider a few other things when you're mining LinkedIn and looking to find your twin, right? Your long lost twin. Where did the individuals that you're intern as MBA students, right? What geographic locations, which is also important for my international friends, right? Was it in the US? Was it back home? So if you see they're all interning back for, an Amazon office in India or wherever, right? You just keep in mind that you may want to say that like in your essay upon graduation, I plan to return home, yada, yada, right? I don't want to go too far into that, but just pay attention to that. Okay, what about number 2? What groups within their respective companies? So you want to be specific with these goals, right? So if you can't just say, I want to be an investment banker at, or I want to be a product manager at Amazon, right? We'll pick on Amazon here. What vertical or what group are you going to be part of the leadership development program, which rotates you through the company? Are you going to be a technical? Are you going to be a tech product manager? Or are you going to be a different type of product manager? So you have to be very, very nuanced, and you have to pay attention to that, right? Because the more you can articulate your short-term goal with specificity, the more, as long as it's relevant to the school that you're applying to, the more you will impress the admissions committee. Now, will you box yourself in or paint yourself into a corner like you have to get that job? I wouldn't worry about that, right? Because as long as your background and the schools can support it, that's fine. You can even state a backup goal in your essay. It's a different presentation. But anyway, specificity is good. It shows that you've done your homework as long as it's relevant to the school, right? Okay, so yeah, anyway, just pay attention to 3 and 4. Pretty obvious at this point. First post-MBA job. What projects were they working on? Hopefully their LinkedIn profile is as significant or as detailed so that it does indicate that. Now, if you are a little bit of a career switcher, you're going from one type of consulting to another, or you're a product manager for Ford Motor Company, and now you want to be a product manager for Microsoft, pay attention to the types of projects that people are working on at Microsoft and what groups, right? Because then you can make the case that, listen, I worked on something at product management. It's product management, right? I have 50, 60, 70, 80% of the transferable skills from working at Ford to whatever I plan on doing in a specific department at Microsoft. All right. Anyway, I think I beat that to death. All right. So now not only skipping back to 2A, slide 2A, not only do you have to look at these people's profiles, but then you got to assess it versus yours if that isn't obvious already, right? But there's more questions here that you really need to, really need to ask yourself, right, in order to vet this. Now, these slides may seem like I'm beating school selection to death and goals and relevant goals and your relevancy to a school to death, but if you don't do this right in the beginning, you can have the world's greatest essays. I could help you write the world's greatest essays, mint them on a plate of gold, but it wouldn't mean shit, right? It wouldn't make a difference in the end, right? They'd be like, that's a nice story, little Susie, little Bobby, but we can't help you. Okay, so anyway, listen, you want to size yourself up again. Let's go to point 3 and 4 here. You want to size yourself up against these individuals from these schools? Can you hang with them, right? Does your progression pre-MBA approximate there? So the past slide 2A was, okay, this is the future version of me, but how well do you stack up against these individuals? Because obviously they were admitted. You can't, people don't usually post their GMAT score on LinkedIn. If they do, maybe they shouldn't, but just how well do you stack up, right? If they were fast tracked at whatever company and you work for a similar firm or the same firm, are you on the same fast track? Do you have more awards for your title, for your industry, whatever? And another question 4, and I don't want this one line bullet point more or less to belie how important this step is. But if you have gaps, and it's a question you need to ask yourself, maybe talk to your boss about if they know you're leaving or if they're willing to give you these opportunities, but how can you address a lack of international experience or leadership or whatever before the deadline, right? Now, you may only have 6 months, so maybe you should be waiting another year, maybe not. But if you do have gaps that matter, right? I'm not talking about physical height or anything like that. Can you address them? All right. Once you have your profiles in hand, yeah, here's a pro tip right here. Once you have these this index of profiles at these target schools, and you saved them all to your Evernote account, go through and take a look at what they were involved in on campus. If they list it, were they president of what club at Wharton, Booth, Kellogg, whatever? And this will start to serve as a blueprint for some of the things you want to be involved in. Now, obviously, if you're a male and they were a part of the Women's Business Connection, then I don't think you can say that and have it be the most relevant. But just pay attention, like if they were a member of the Strategic Operations Management Club, and that's your game and that's what you want to get into, what roles? Google them, Strategic Operations Management Association or Club in Wharton or whatever, target business school, and go and see if you can find their profile on a wharton.edu webpage, maybe an expose, a little blog post about their involvement and what they were doing, and read through all of that, right? That not only helps you understand what goes on at the school in terms of its mechanics and how people get involved, but it's an excellent anecdote, or it serves as an excellent blueprint for how you want to write about what you want to get involved in, right? So, and without getting too much into it, this is a great way to research and know a program, great way to articulate your specific and nuanced interest in it in the essays and during an interview. Anyway, all right. So, and a great way for you to understand right off the bat kind of how you fit in and what you will start to contribute, right? It's that yin yang thing. All right, moving on. Next step, open up online applications, read through them. I mean, this may sound remedial, but it's not. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put it in the third slot, right? The reason I want each and every one of you to start opening up online applications, and by the way, I do understand that a lot of these schools, these top MBA programs, or even non-top MBA programs, will not have opened up their new apps for this coming year, coming application season. That's okay. I still want you to go on. I still want you to open up, yes, an old app, a round 3 app, round 4 app for this year, and read through the questions. Don't worry about not putting in real names and real email addresses. Don't worry about all that rigmarole, right? Just put in your real name, email address. Listen, by the way, if you start a new application this year, that information will transfer, and in no way will an admissions committee be like, why didn't you apply last year? I see you had your information. They couldn't care less about that type of nuance. I'm just saying that because I've had these questions pop up before. Anyway, my point is this. Read through every single freaking page there. Most of them may be boring, maybe half. What's your mom's name? What's your dad's name, right? How old are you? But you'll start to understand what these schools ask, to what depth, and what they may be worried about. And so there's a lot of hidden questions on there. Most people just think they can go to GMAT Club or any other website that lists the essay questions and have a full assessment of what they need to do on the application. No, my friends. That's how you screw yourself, right? So you start early in the beginning of the process, open up your applications. I swear to God, read through every question, every page, don't take it for granted, and you'll start to see that there are all these short application questions. And when I say short, they can be 20 words, 50 words. Sometimes they're a couple of hundred words, 250 words. That's a nasty surprise the day before the deadline, right? And they may be anything from what are your short-term goals, what are your long-term goals, what's your backup plan, what type of personal conviction or interest do you have in these goals, right? What motivates your goals, I think is what Ross asks online. And that's not something you would ever really see by going to the forums and just thinking, okay, there's, 3 or 4 questions for Ross. Why Ross, right? If you ever find yourself looking at information on GMAT Club or any other school's website and not the online application, and you ask yourself, well, that's weird. Ross or whatever school, they don't ask for a long-term goal. Why is that? Well, what it may be is that it's actually on the online application, right? And you would know that by starting up front, and I wouldn't need to have the slide in my presentation anymore. Excuse me. So there are also other questions that'll help you ascertain what a school's really worried about. If you log on to the online application and just simply read through, you don't even have to start answering. For example, Columbia asks, what current students have you spoken with? Now, if you spend all your time talking to some alumni at work or just tapping alumni, then boy, you're SOL, as they say, right? Shit out of luck. So you really, and when they ask a question like that, what they're really saying is, hey man, or well man, you really need to engage our school and speak with current students, because then we know that you made the effort to get to know us personally and that you actually want to go here. So you're not, two-timing us, right? You're not just applying to every top school and, okay, I'll throw one in at Columbia, what the hell, right? So the more you engage the students, okay, and alumni, beyond showing up to these online presentations or hopefully soon in-person presentations, the more you actually reach out, and there's another slide here in a few that I'll cover some of this, the more they believe you actually want to go there. And you can often take someone who is great on paper from being waitlisted to see if, they really want to go to Columbia or Booth or Kellogg and not Harvard or Stanford or Wharton. It can really make or break whether or not you're on the wait list versus straight admitted when you apply. All right. What else? I think NYU Stern used to ask, what have you done to engage our community? I mean, these are all schools that are worried about being two-timed, right? About being the second prettiest, person at the dance, I suppose, right? What other programs are you applying to? Schools that tend to ask that right away, that'll tell you, okay, they're concerned about matriculation. They're concerned about their yield, probably. They don't want to extend a bunch of invites and then not have me reciprocate or accept. They want to know who they're competing against. Yeah. But they want to know what position they're in. Are they in pole position? Are they in first position? Or are they dead last? Right. And it will affect their decision. Why? Again, in the very pragmatic sense, the admissions committees are not only beholden to recruiters and what they think and who's hiring, but also to their rankings. I know it may sound ridiculous. So US News and World Report gets a say in your application or the outcome of your application. And that's indirectly, yeah. Right. This is a popularity contest. Schools are trying to move up. I'll give you an example. How on earth is Wharton number 1? And no disrespect to Wharton, even though it may sound like that, but in my experience since 2006, Harvard and Stanford are schools that are much harder to get into and much more competitive, right? But US News ranks Wharton number 1, really? Well, that's because Wharton's probably really good at managing the data that they send over to US News, right? Or managing whatever goes into the data that they send over to US News. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. But so here, here's another question. How will you conduct your job search, right? What do you know about the type of industry or job that you want in the city the school is located in? Now, LBS asks a question like this. And if you don't know, LBS also asks, when you told your Duke asks a similar question, or they used to, when you told your friends, and like, what have you told your family, your wife, your husband, or your kids, or whoever about your plans, and are they supportive, right? You would never really know. That's a big question at LBS, but more than that, LBS asks, really, have you reached out to anybody in the industry in London, banking or whatever you want to go into? Like, how do you know what you're getting into job-wise? And I like that LBS asks that question because essentially they're telling you what most MBA students eventually find out at whatever program they go to, which is the Career Center, is not the crutch you thought it would be to get the job that you want. They'll kind of make some intros, set up a few interviews, but you really have to do at least 50, 60, 80, 100% of the humping, right? Of the getting out there and hitting the pavement and knocking on doors and kissing babies and shaking hands. All right. Anyway, I digress. Now, I'll give you bonus points. I'll give you kudos. I'll give you whatever, a stick in the eye, if you review the interview questions up front as well. What interview questions are you talking about, Paul? Go to GMAT Club. Since this is a GMAT Club presentation, look up the interview questions per school for the schools that you are thinking about applying to, top 7, let's say. There will be clues in those questions and the questions they ask as to what they really care about, right? You'll see some of these. What other schools are you applying to? How have you engaged us? Have you thought about your job search? Do you have a backup plan? Besides your short-term goal, do you have a backup plan, right? Schools that ask you about a backup plan, and I always encourage my international clients, my international homies, to give them a backup plan. I'll answer some questions about that afterwards, but if they ask, like, if you have a backup plan, they just want to know, they're concerned about your ability as an international or as somebody who's from a non-traditional background, let's say, about how much you've thought this through, how flexible you are, how pragmatic you are, and just that you're not going to be sorely disappointed and thus a pain in the ass to the school should you not get the types of jobs that you're gunning for. Anyway, so just go through those questions. You'll see that there are they can offer you some insight early on in the process before it's too late, right? Okay. Now, once you have started to narrow the funnel of your target programs, right? So you started with 15, now you're down to 7 or 5, whatever it may be. You want to start reaching out to your target programs and more or less kicking the tires, right? Now, the first thing you should do, check the admissions committee website for each target school. They should have, most of them should have some sort of ambassador program where they will get current students to email you back, maybe have a nice Skype phone call or Zoom, whatever. But reach out, right? Get on their radar and engage. It's the most simple, straightforward way. And you want to do it early. You don't want to do it in September, October, even August, right? You want to do it now because A, you need to whittle down your school list and know if this is actually a school for you. But B, think about every Tom, Dick, Harry, Larry, Susie, Mary that shows up in the fall who didn't see this presentation, who didn't listen to Paul, who then are like, oh shit, I got to engage these kids at the school, and alumni. These alumni are slammed. They're in class. It's the fall semester, right? So do it over the summer. Do it right now, in fact, right? But do it over the summer as well before they get back into class and whatever. So there may not be a lot of students to speak with you, but if it's all being done over email and Skype, Zoom, whatever, you should be able to have a face-to-face meeting through these programs, right? But their bandwidth will be severely limited in the fall, and you will be SOL, right? You'll be the guy or gal without a chair when the music stops. All right. So now the other thing too, as I am a big fan of cold emailing, right? The hit rate, the success rate, the response rate may not be as high, but at the same time, you have nothing to lose, right? But if you have something to offer, like if you're really into supply chain management and there's a supply chain management club and it's part of your goals, or you think it's going to be part of your goals, but email, right? Email the club officers, right? Now, don't blast all 8 of them at once, right? Because that's going to be hard for you to manage and you end up potentially having the same conversation 8 times, 8 different people. But start from the top, email a couple of people, see what the response is. Ask them if you can, have a call, introduce yourself, ask them if you can have a call. Listen, the worst they can do is say no. You're not going to go on some blacklist of, dummies who did something, committed a faux pas and did something they weren't supposed to, right? Just email. If they don't want to deal with you, they'll just ignore you, right? But oftentimes, if you went to the same school, you worked at the same place, or that person, the student is trying to get a job at your company, oh my God, they'll definitely email you back, right? And have a conversation about what the school's like, what the club's like, their involvement there. And, for that matter, let's say you emailed a bunch of people from all these different clubs at a specific school, and they never get back to you. Okay, well, that tells you a little something about maybe the culture of the school and the responsiveness. Now, maybe it's finals week, maybe the plague descended upon campus. I don't know. But just if you're emailing Tuck and everybody gets back to you, then you email Columbia and nobody gets back to you. All right, maybe that tells you something. Maybe not. Maybe you like that. All right. So now in this next bullet point, I probably should have numbered these. Take a look around at your work colleagues, right? Who are the alumni that are there? Can you go grab a cup of coffee? I don't know how awkward it would be at work, to email somebody from a different department and ask for, take him to lunch or something, buy him or her some coffee. But also consider here the second part. You may not want to let the cat out of the bag, right? That you're applying to business school. So proceed with caution, because even that person may be at a different location, different department, things will eventually get out. Like, hey, Jerry, why are you meeting with that random person over from accounting? Are you trying to switch jobs within the company, or are you going back to business school? Anyway, so just be sensitive, right? Okay. The other thing too, listen, this whole pandemic, depending on the part of the world you're from, will end at some point, hopefully. So are you going to visit schools? Are you going to show up physically? The online or the physical in-person class tours are probably going to start opening back up in the States. If not, just get on those online sessions and show up. So I'm a big fan of signing up for any and every online session. So listen, if you happen to be a left-handed purple person and they have a session set up for that at whatever top business school, yeah, then attend. But if they have one that's just for general folks or just for internationals and you're domestic, well, you can attend those too, to be honest with you, right? You may not learn a lot that's new or relevant, but you can say, and this is a bit of a game of numbers, right? You can say, hey, admissions committee, I engaged you and your school 5 times, right? I always average, I like 3 to 4 touch points, whether that's reaching out to clubs and getting a response, online tours, in-person tours, speaking with alumni. I always like that. And it is more powerful to speak with current students and alumni for you and your own knowledge and whittling down these schools and narrowing down your target list, but also for the admissions committee as well. Because think about it, every Tom, Dick, Harry, Susie, Mary, Betty shows up to the online sessions, but fewer will engage students, right? So that's why you should start early. All right. Okay. And at this point, bottom of, page 4.4, you should have more or less a final list of target schools. Now, you may add some, you may lose some, whatever. Maybe you still have to take the GMAT as you're doing all of this, which is a super pain in the ass. So maybe if you get a 650, you're not going to apply to Wharton or Harvard or wherever. But right now, this is kind of a blueprint or a template for getting to your final list, or a more final list. All right, you get it. Now, okay, so now here's where the real fun begins. You have that final list of 5 schools. I say, listen, right now you can apply. It's April 30th, May 1st. Right now, you can probably, and granted, I don't know everyone's unique situation, but you can probably bang out 4 or 5 good quality applications in round 1. Now, it depends on so many things, right? But I've seen it done consistently, at least working with me. Maybe that's a shameless self-plug, but you can probably bang out 4 or 5 if you get your act together. Now, if you get the test done in the next month or 2, you can still do 4 or 5, right? And not sacrifice quality. Anyway, so in general, put schools, your apps, put them in the order of the deadline date. You will be, well, maybe you won't be surprised, but a week or even 2 days can make a huge difference, right? So even if a school falls, let's say round 2, for the sake of this example, most of those school deadlines fall within the first 7-8 days of January. And then you'll have a few other schools. MIT is usually in the middle of January. And you may not think a week would make a big difference. Boy or girl, would you be wrong? It makes a huge difference. Sleep, managing what you have to do at work, managing personal relationships, even the time you have to comb your hair and take care of yourself. So I tend to advocate always go in order, even if there's just a day difference. put that first school first. Now, there are caveats here. You want to make sure, like Stanford and Harvard, their essays, in my opinion, to simplify this example, are similar, right? Stanford's what matters most to you and why, and then Harvard asks, tell us anything you think is relevant that we should know about you that we wouldn't already know about you from your application or because we weren't born yesterday. Those two questions about values, perspective, very personal essays. All right. So if you have let's say 3 schools for the sake of a simplistic example, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. Harvard, let's say, is on January 1st, Stanford's on January 2nd, and Wharton is on January 5th, right? A few days afterwards. According to my simplistic model, you would work on Harvard, then Stanford, then Wharton. And you may find yourself working on, let's say, depending on how much time you have, Harvard and Stanford in parallel. I wouldn't do that, right? And that's point 4 here, right? Go in sequential order when you write essays, when you apply to schools. Try not to run too many schools in parallel, especially if they are similar to each other. So in the situation I just quoted with Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, due on Harvard first, Stanford due on the 2nd, and Wharton due on the 5th. What I would say is, if you have to work in parallel, work on Harvard, and this always happens towards the end, right? As the deadline nears, work on Harvard and Wharton together, right? Because Wharton's essays are, as I stated earlier, but for those who might just be joining Wharton, is what do you hope to gain professionally through the Wharton MBA? This is from memory. And the second is basically, how do you plan on engaging our community, right? So, what do you bring to our community? So those essays are different enough, Harvard versus Wharton, that I would say, okay, if you have to work on things in parallel, if you have to order order the attack, how you attack these essays, if you're running short on time, but even if you want to double up and run things in parallel, which I don't necessarily recommend, but of course, if you don't have the luxury of time, you may have to work on Harvard and Wharton together, because the essays are different enough where you won't run into the problem of rework. So let me put it to you a different way. If you had to work on Harvard and Stanford in parallel together, the problem is, since the essays tend to be somewhat similar, or there is some, 50%, let's say, duplicative content, you may run into a situation where it's like you're chasing some type of ghost, right? You make some change in Harvard, you're like, ooh, I like that. And you're like, okay, I got to go do that to Stanford. And then you keep doing it to Stanford, right? It's like, no, get Harvard to a good place, finish it off. If you have the luxury of time, then start on Stanford. So you have something that's set, you go to Stanford. Now, you may start editing Stanford and you realize, oh, I wrote something better and more concisely. Then you can go back and put it into Harvard, right? But just freeze Harvard. I always say to my clients, at least, get the essay, your Harvard essay, for example, to 95% done, right? You really like it. Maybe you're shopping it around to your friends, family. That's a whole other thing, presentation, but get it to 95%. And then move on to Stanford. You're going to work on Stanford. You're going to become a better, more concise writer with some of the content. The essays are somewhat similar. You can go back and transfer it. Boom, right? But again, just to be clear, what am I saying here? Because there's a few things going on. If you have to do things in parallel, work on schools that have dissimilar essays, so you don't end up with a rework issue and propagating a change you made in one essay to like 5 others, right? It's a quality. You will see that the quality comes down and you pull your hair out at the same time. All right. Anyway, and again, of course, like anything I've presented in the slide, it all depends on your timing and how strong of a writer you are and who your consultant is, even, or if you even have one, right? Anyway, real quick here. This is not a bullet point, but since I brought it up, shopping your essays to friends and family, bosses, graduates, your Harvard essay or Wharton essay, graduates of Wharton, I want you to be real careful about that, right? For several reasons. And this is from an admissions consultant perspective, right? You have every right to do that. I want you to do that as your trusted confidant and expert admissions consultant. But here's the thing, do it at the end, because you don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen. It will drive me crazy inevitably, but more importantly, it will drive you crazy, because you won't know who to believe. You're like, Paul says he's been doing this since 2006. And all of a sudden I talked to my best friend, Susie Smith, who's a graduate of Wharton Business School. And he says that it should be, that this is off, right? Don't take that as gospel. Go back to any qualified admissions consultant. Go back to even what you've learned and what you believe. Have the confidence to have that conversation. Be direct, but don't be a weather vane or just spin willy-nilly based on input. You ask 5 different people, maybe there'll be a consensus, right? But maybe there won't be, and it will make life hell. There will be things that you start inserting into the essay that make them too long. There will be things that don't make sense based on all the work you've done with your consultant or all the work you've done with whoever's helping you up to that point. So pick a trusted person early in the beginning, someone that can maybe help you edit or polish, maybe one alumni that can give you more direction on the nuances of a Harvard or a Wharton, and stick with that, right? If you don't use a consultant. And then at the end, shop it around. Mom and dad will give you feedback, sister and brother, best friends, and keep in mind that you ask them for criticism, so they will tear it apart, right? But anytime somebody recommends that you change or do something, especially if they recommend adding something, you must ask them. And this should be late in the game as you're trying to finalize your essay. You must ask them what they recommend taking out, because that will force them to think critically. But also, for God's sake, these essays are capped at 500 words, whatever the word limit is. You can't just keep shoving more, 10 pounds of shit into a 5-pound bag, right? It doesn't work that way. So essays will all come down to priorities. What is more important, to talk about the Glee Club or talk about the consulting club, right? To talk about something that's very intangible, like the spirit of Wharton and knowledge for action, or to talk about what you're going to do tactically as a member of this club, right? I'm not going to tell you right now what's right or wrong, but just, save it till the end, right? Don't introduce too much noise, because you'll never ever get to the end with a good product if there are too many cooks in the kitchen. All right. And I'm speaking from personal experience. All right. 6A. Here we go. And some of these points I may have already covered. Forgive me. Start writing these essays, right? This is the point. Now, listen, I think I have 2 slides dedicated to this. It belies how much freaking time this is going to take. Hopefully I did capture some of that here. But all right, this could be a whole presentation to itself. And it is. I have a few of them. Look on GMAT Club on YouTube. If you email me at the email address at the bottom, I can maybe provide you some guides that I have, maybe. But just first to assess, moving on, like, how well can you answer these questions? If you are running short on time, if you're running short on ideas, if you're just not a strong writer, if you're just not confident in what you're writing, okay, maybe you may want to consider a consultant. And yes, this is a shameless plug, but here's the thing. Get one early. Don't go to the table scraps at the end, right? Just lock one down early, whatever you have to do, even if you don't start right away. And the other things, and this is a sidebar, when you start writing essays, if you need a consultant, without going too far into this, you got to know how many years of experience, how many clients have they worked with. You got to see some writing samples, not just the polished ones at the end. You want to see some in-process work with track changes on, right? You want to know or make sure that they're not in between jobs. And this is just my own personal experience, right? I used to work at Veritas Prep. I used to manage all of the GMAT test prep instructors there, as well as consultants, admissions consultants. You don't want them to be in between jobs, right? You don't necessarily need somebody who is on the admissions committee, to be perfectly honest. What you need is somebody who has your back. Somebody will stay up till 3, 4 in the morning to help you out when it's crunch time. Anyway, yeah. So that being said, moving on. All right, now let's get into a timing example here when you're writing essays, right? And so you have your set of schools. You're attacking them in order. The first set of essays here for, let's say, Harvard. Just know that the first school, you're going to be rough, right? You've never really written these essays before. You've never really, you're just rusty. I mean, you may have never had a creative writing class in your life. Most people haven't. And you're new in the working relationship with, your consultant. But just know that the first school, I'll give you a representative example from my life with my clients, for example. And this is the minimum, by the way. So the first school, and it depends on the complexity of the essays, right? If it's a very existential, what matters most to you, it could take very long, right? If it's very straightforward, right? What are your goals? And you've done all the research, or give me a time you were a leader and what you learned from it. That's also a very straightforward essay, more or less, not as straightforward as the goals. But anyway, the first school could take 8 to 10 draft iterations, right? I mean, this is at a bare minimum. That is, the client or you, the applicant, are going to touch it 5 times, and me, Paul, the consultant, will touch it another 5 times at a bare minimum, right? So each week, the way it should usually be is, and again, this is with a consultant, you work on a set of essays for days, the first half of the week, then you'd flip it over to whoever you may be working with, right? Now, maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your buddy, maybe it's some alumni, maybe it's a consultant. When you give it to them, give them 3 days to get back to you, right? If they get back to you the same day, either they have nothing to do at work or in life, or they're really not thinking critically about it, right? So it always helps to have a writing partner. Again, it may feel like I'm pushing consulting services, and I am, but just know that if you think you need help too late in the process and you go and try to find somebody or pay somebody, you're going to probably get the scrap consultants, like the leftover consultants that are there. But also, you're handing somebody something that may be a real turd, right? And there's only so much anyone, even if you are the world's greatest writer, editor, there's only so much a person can help you polish that turd, given how much time is left and how off point the essay may be, right? Yeah, I mean, again, email me. I may be able to provide you something. What I also caution you against when writing essays is to, and again, this is me. If I were doing it and I didn't know everything I know, if you buy something like the Harvest Guide, which has 60 different essays or 50 different essays, right? The problem with that, and I don't recommend that. That being said, a lot of you probably run out and buy that. But here, if you do buy it, the problem with that is you don't understand the background of the person who's writing it. You don't understand the mechanics. So you're trying to reverse engineer, like reverse blueprint something, and you don't really know what Harvard or Stanford or any other school is looking for. So you end up with these I call them Frankenstein essays, where they kind of look good, but it's like a bunch of different things mashed together. The themes aren't consistent. There's no thesis or main idea that's being put forth that's clear. It looked like you borrowed it from somebody else, which is pretty much what you're doing if you rely too much upon finished essays. You don't understand the strategy, the mechanics behind the message, and specifically your message that you should be getting across given your background. Anyway, all right. So with respect to timing and how much you should be putting into your essay writing, at a minimum, again, working with a writing partner or bouncing ideas off somebody, you're probably, in any given week, you probably spend about 4 hours on a 500-word essay, which is usually what most of them are. And you're usually spending, or maybe about 2 to 3 hours on essays that are below that. You're 200 to 250 to 450 or a little bit lower than that, right? Again, it depends on how many weeks you've been working on this. Obviously, as you near the deadline or as you near completion of an essay, you're not spending that much time. It's just kind of like review and polish. All right. So in the beginning, at a minimum, if a school's essays total to about, and this is based on my experience, total to about 1,500 words, right? 3 500-word essays. If you are doing the math, you're going to spend about 10 hours a week writing. And, if you have a consultant, they should probably be spending about that as amount of time as well. Anyway, moving on, 6B. That's with school 1, right? With school 2, in general, if you want to rule of thumb, Paul's rule of thumb here, you can probably spend about a third less time with every subsequent school app. Now, of course, this depends on how similar or dissimilar the questions are. But once you kind of get the hang of it, like a school like Wharton and Booth, to me, their essays are somewhat similar, right? First one's kind of like a professional goals essay, and the second one's kind of a values, or one has kind of a what do you bring to the community is Wharton, and the other one's more like values guide you in your life, things like that. How have you made decisions? So it's a little more personal, kind of like Wharton essay 2, but Booth is even more so their essay 2. But just what's my point? What's my long-winded point here? You can expect to spend about you start with Wharton and you bang that out, you do a good job, you kind of know the ropes. A lot of essay 1, any goals essay will be transferable school to school, right? Within reason. And since the two essays are a little bit the same. Maybe there's like 30-40% overlap with Wharton 2 and maybe Booth 2 or Kellogg 2. Actually, Kellogg and Booth may be a little bit better of an example to compare with their SATs. But again, since you're getting the hang of it, you get the themes, you understand what the school's looking for, boom, a third less. All right. So, again, and I mentioned this a few slides ago, like it's a whole S curve, right? And I'll give you a very real example that I see all the time with Harvard, right? With HBS. My clients, and I love them all, they will spend, I shit you not, 75-80% on HBS because that's their dream school. That's a school everybody's in their whole neighborhood and their parents and family have wanted them to go to. And what they do is they're robbing Paul to pay Peter. So we're getting to the deadlines where we beat HBS. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. There's all these crazy iterations and bad ideas that I'm trying to shoot down and maintain. And holy shit, now there's only 2-3 weeks to complete a Stanford and a Wharton. That's not the right thing to do. So you got to consider, like, are the changes you want to make to your HBS essay, which people always want to be 100, 110% perfect. Are they the amount of time that's required? And this is, I'm being very honest with everybody here. Is the amount of time that's required worth changing? And again, look at it from the admissions committee perspective. Are they going to care that you've added this information if the information is even relevant? And most of the time it's not. You see people getting nervous, and I see people getting nervous and plowing in everything at the end, dumping the kitchen sink in because they're not sure if it's actually going to work because they have opinions from 10 different people, right? Much less me. And they start like slathering on extra layers of protective paint to try to make this thing glow in the dark and look awesome. But what they're doing is just adding cruft, which is unnecessary wordiness and irrelevant points, right? So I always say, so what's my point? I always say, get your essay to like 90-95%, right in that range. Set it down, walk away, start on the next school, get that to 90-95%. Then go back to the first school, Harvard, and see if you've written, you started Harvard first, Stanford second. If anything you wrote for Stanford, you want to transfer back into it, right? And inevitably, at the bare minimum, you will have become hopefully a better writer by finishing up a Stanford. So, at least you can go back and make things more concise in Harvard, even though Harvard doesn't have a word limit. And on that point, even though Harvard doesn't have a word limit, doesn't mean you can just spout off anything. If you are going over, in my opinion, 1,000 words, that's too long. I've seen guys and gals get into Harvard writing 800 words, maybe 850, anywhere from 750 to 850, somewhere in there. I've had people get in with 1,500 words, which was a little too long, to be honest with you, but they got in. Usually, and it depends, a lot of times it comes down to geography, to be honest with you, and professional background. But usually international students that I have will come in around 1,100, 1,200, sometimes 1,300, whatever. So, okay, sorry about that tangent, but just so you know. Anyway, my point is S-curve, consider what the trade-offs you're making. Always do that, right? So never be afraid to stop one when it's pretty good. And I will tell my clients when it's pretty good and it's time to move on, and hopefully they will accept that advice. All right. And then the same thing for the third school, fourth school, fifth school. Now, in the beginning, when you start writing your essays and you're trying to decide the order in which you will attack these schools, you have to consider, obviously, all the schools at once. But one thing I should have pointed out in an earlier slide, my fault, is, again, consider the overlap between schools, right? So, yeah, maybe there is a school that falls earlier. Maybe Booth comes before Kellogg, but if you, by working on all the other schools, including Kellogg but not Booth, even though Kellogg comes later, you may want to work on Kellogg first because it may help you automatically by default. And I'm not saying this is cut and paste. It may provide you 99% of the content you need to complete your Kellogg essays by doing a Booth. By doing a school that comes before, I'm getting dates confused. By doing a school earlier whose date comes later, you may actually have enough to fill in and address all essays for a few schools that come earlier than the Kellogg, right? So if Kellogg comes later, you can move it up before Booth or even MIT or whatever, and I'm making up these dates if it actually addresses those other schools. Is everyone confused yet? because I think I just confused myself. All right. Seriously, though, just always do that environmental scan of all the questions up front, see where the overlaps are, see when the dates fall, and then then plot your course. All right. Now, start the letters of recommendation shortly after the essays. Now, what I mean by that is several things. Let's say you're starting this week on your essays. I don't think, in fact, I know you don't need to approach your boss 2 weeks from today or 2 weeks from next week with your plans for business school and if he or she's going to write your recommendation. I think that's a bit too early. Of course, you don't want to approach them too late, like September, where you're only giving them a few weeks to complete stuff and where it may be a big surprise. I think what everyone should be doing now with work, and again, it's April 30th, May 1st, is you should be going up to and the deadlines for round one are, September, October. You should be with always remembering not to let the cat out of the bag too early, right? And your boss. But if you think your boss is going to be receptive to business school, right? You're not the first person who's gone to business school. Maybe they went to business school. Maybe it's customary in your place of work that after 2 or 3 years, you're off to business school. Approach them earlier than not. And just, you don't have to necessarily give them anything, the questions or bullet points about your, experience or your resume, but just kind of gauge him or her as to whether or not, as to how supportive they are. You kind of know they are, and then also gauge what they want. Now, what scares me is when I hear that a boss wants nothing. Even if a boss loves you, even if it's your mom or dad that's your boss, they forget things. They're managing a bunch of other people. They have a completely different, set of projects, and they just forget. Even if they think you're awesome, even if they tell you you're awesome and that your greatest thing since sliced bread. So you want to put together a sheet that has all the questions, all the letter of recommendation questions, which is usually question 1. Well, question 0, how do you know the applicant? How do you interact? 50 words. Question 2 is usually, or question 1 rather, is usually, what are the applicant's strengths compared to people in similar positions? And that's usually about 300 words to 500 words. And the question 2 is, what constructive feedback have you given the applicant and what was their response? Okay, how did you improve, in other words? So here, when you approach them, the first initial coffee talk is just, hey, I'm considering applying to business school. Just want to kind of gauge you. Okay, you're cool. All right, and then I also wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to provide me a recommendation. Hopefully you're having this conversation with your current direct boss. And they'd be like, I'd love to, right? Well, then you can ask them, what they want to see from you, but really you would want to tell them more or less that if it's okay with them, you're going to provide them a Word document with all the questions, letter of recommendation questions from all the schools, and you're going to put down your bullet points there of what you've done, what you think, like not only what you've done from your reviews that you've had with them, but maybe tidbits from emails or anecdotes from the projects you've worked on or what you've delivered. Put it in bullet points for them. I did this for you, boss, on these dates working with these people. And Bill from accounting said this, and Susie from finance said this. They said it was, and the client said I was a breath of fresh air, and they want me to marry their kid, right? Whatever goes there, put it in there, right? Especially the anecdotes and what was so with the impact, your role, your title, the dates, what was so difficult and what the challenges, what your specific deliverables and the things that you owned and led, especially if you stepped up to assume more authority, put that all in their bullet point, give it to your boss, let them take it, right? Now, I want to be realistic here, right? Some bosses don't even want to do that, right? It depends. I usually see it based on industry, but some bosses want to do as little work as possible, right? I'll leave it at that, but you have to use your best judgment here. You can't write your recommendations for so many reasons. One, it's unethical, okay? But even if you don't care about that, you run the risk as a noob, as somebody who doesn't write a lot of letters of recommendation, you run the risk of making your recommendations sound like each other, especially if they're going to the same workplace, and bought 2 different recommenders at the same workplace. And you run the risk of making them sound like your essays, depending on the question, right? A lot of times I'll see people who have written their recommendations. I worked in the Anderson, admissions office, but just through this job, I will see recommendations that have the exact same sentences as the other recommendation. I mean, word for word, paragraphs even, where their boss is cut and pasted. But also I'll see all these phrases that they used, but more than that, in their essays, but more than that, I'll see things that just shouldn't be in there. Like Little Johnny. Did you know that what I love about Little Johnny is that he really has a passion for, animals, and he started the Fuzzy Pet Rescue Center, and he's there every weekend handing out soup to cats and dogs and, whatever. Monkeys, whatever may be in that shelter, and it's just like, okay, that you're not doing that at work. Why is your boss talking about that? It sounds like you wrote it. You want to know why? Because you wrote it. So what are you doing? Right? It sounds so disingenuous, fake, and you don't think someone on an admissions committee who's read thousands of recommendations over years and who's generally cynical in nature because they read a lot of BS, they're going to look at that. You're lucky if all they do is just roll their eyes, but it does undermine your credibility. That's when they're going to start questioning other things across your app. That's when you get on the wait list instead of getting accepted, if you even make the wait list, things like that, right? So going back to an earlier point, if you do give your bosses information, give them information, by the way, that is distinctly different, right? So listen, if you work at the same workplace and the bosses were kind of involved in all your projects, a lot of it will overlap. A lot of it will overlap, but emphasize perhaps different things, but don't give them word for word the same bullet point, because bosses, when it is the 11th hour, and I see this, not with my clients, but I've seen it before, they will just cut and paste, or they'll change a few things here, take out the bullet points, smash it all together. There you go. It looks ridiculous. It looks like your boss, more than then it looks like you wrote it, or that maybe there was some undue collusion here. It looks like your boss doesn't give a shit about you, right? So start getting this thing done earlier. Give your boss in general a couple of months, right? They're not going to need that much. Keep checking in with them every week. Ask them if they need anything else. But when you come up with your cheat sheet of projects and things that you've delivered for your boss, sit down with them again and go over it and what they will be expected to do, right? You don't want them opening up the document you may have sent over to them at the 11th hour. You also want to include the questions for every school. Some schools have additional questions. I mean, Kellogg has something about empathy. I think NYU Stern has something about your emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. So just find those questions online, whatever you have to do. But give your boss one document they can open up and cut and paste the bullet points into each set of questions for each school. If you give them an example of how this strength that you're demonstrating is applicable to this school, say Kellogg or say MIT, change it for your boss. If they cut and paste what you wrote, where they shouldn't be, but if they do, and we all know human beings and bosses, they're going to cut MIT and paste it into Kellogg, and you're going to look like, well, it's going to look like your boss doesn't give a shit about you. All right. Anyway, no matter how good the rest of it is. I know I'm going on and on about, but this is like, there's so much work that goes into these letters of recommendation. I think a lot of it's overkill with clients, but of course clients get nervous, applicants get nervous. They want to make sure everything's perfect, but just know this. I'll leave you with this. The enemy of authenticity is perfection, right? Doesn't mean you can get away with forming incomplete sentences or, coming across looking like you were raised in a barn, or your boss was raised in a barn, or you work in a barn, which may be appropriate if you're a farmer. But if you are spending as much time in your letters of recommendation as you are your essays, you're doing it wrong. If you're spending half the time that you spend on your essays, on your letters of recommendation, you're doing it wrong. It's overkill. You're trying to polish things too much. It'll end up looking fake as hell. It will run against you. There is an inflection point here. Okay. Anyway, now a few things here. What happens if your work doesn't support you going off to business school? Okay, that happens a lot. And it's a few reasons. One, people in banking, usually my banking homies, my banking clients, they don't want it affects their bonus, right? So they don't want to let the cat out of the bag too early, or they don't get their bonus. Why would a bonus give you $100,000 if you're not going to be around next year, right? Even if you earned that $100,000, that's not the way these folks think on Wall Street, apparently. Another thing is maybe you just got to the company, right? You just started a new job. You like it, you don't like it, whatever. You didn't tell them in the interview you were thinking about business school because maybe you weren't. And now all of a sudden you have to go tell this person. Well, think about it this way. You don't want to tell your new boss. You have a legitimate reason. I believe that. I'm telling you, you have a legitimate reason. If you fear being neutralized, put in a coat closet, sat at the little kids table, right? Not given legitimate responsibility, or your boss may rage, your boss may fire you. You just joined this company. Go to your old employer. Now, this is always why, ladies and gentlemen, you always leave prior places of work on good terms. Don't shit the bed. Don't burn the bridges. Don't burn the house down. Leave on good terms, and then you can go back and you can get that. Now, maybe you've already left on bad terms. All right, then surely if you're a competent, decent person, there must be some old boss at your old place of work, even if they're not at the company anymore, that can vouch for you. Maybe it's a client or a customer account or a partner or whatever. Go look after them if you kind of burn the house down on the way back at your old employer, right? For those who may take up a new job in the coming months and you don't want to disclose that you're thinking about business school, okay, then don't, right? But just know when you leave, you're going to burn that bridge. And if you plan on going back to whatever country or industry, it can be a very small world. I don't want to sound like your mom and your dad or grandma and grandpa, but just don't create unnecessary liabilities if you don't have to. I'm trying to think of whatever other liabilities as to who or considerations as to who an appropriate recommender would be. If you can't tell let's say you've been working at a company for a year or two, you really should get a recommender from that place of work, but you can't tell your boss. This is where it gets tricky and difficult and scary. You can go and ask, try to find another business unit manager or lead that you've worked with that really loves you, and maybe you can take them in confidence and they won't spill the beans or let the cat out of the bag that you're leaving. But chances are it's going to get out if you do that. So what I recommend doing is trying to find a boss, a senior level boss, your boss's title or above, that has left the company and gone on to do something else. Tap that person if you really can't tell anybody at work. And hopefully that person will say yes. And hopefully they know you enough to say, I worked with, little Johnny or little Susie for however many months. And he or she was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah, whatever. And that's when you really want to provide them with bullet points as to what you worked on and all this stuff, because they are not going to remember. All right. What else? I think I've kind of beat that to death. You really only need 2 letters of recommendation. Some schools now are 1. I think MIT Sloan has 1 now. All right. And again, I would start this process early on so today's April 30th, May 1st. I would say, and again, your boss and your workplace better, but, broach the conversation now so there's no surprises later in the year. Tell them that you will be giving them something. Ask them if they're supportive. Okay, yeah. Tell them you're going to do a lot of the legwork and groundwork for them so they're not wandering through the desert blind. And then give them, what you promised to give them at least, let's say, 8 weeks before the deadline, before the earliest deadline. Don't piecemeal this to your bosses. They will rip your head off eventually. Give them all of it at once. Let them fill them all out at once, right? And keep reminding them every week, like, hey man, do you need my help with that? Is there anything I can do? Do we need me to sit down, right? I know you have a lot on your plate. Is there anything I can take off your plate, boss, so you can help me out, dog? All right. That's about it. All right, so let's see. Moving on. All right, now work on your resume within the last 2 weeks before, last 2 or 3 weeks before the school deadline, right? Why procrastinate on that? Well, it's not procrastinating because there's going to be things that you work on, things that come up at work. The resume is more or less a living document, right? An updated document, one that should be constantly updated, but table or hold or cue all of those updates. Know what you're going to say in your essays. Know what your boss is going to say in your letters of recommendation, and then manage your resume according to that. Meaning, make sure everything is consistent. Everything, one hand washes the other, so to speak. Everything is consistent here, and make sure it's consistent with your online LinkedIn profile or anything like that, right? These resumes should be one page. Should only be one page. If you have less than 10 years of work experience, one page. That's not what I say. That's what Wharton MBA's Career Management Center says, right? Along with a bunch of other MBA programs. If you think your resume needs to be a two-pager, you're wrong. It's either too technical, it's too wordy, you're not using appropriate space on the resume, maybe too much white space. Nobody is that special, to be honest with you, even though you may think that you are. But this is an exercise in being concise. This is like a cheat sheet for the admissions committee. Get it to one page, because 2 pages tells the admissions committee you didn't spend enough time focusing on what was really important. You didn't spend enough time on the resume. There's no reason for a 2-pager. Okay. So again, capture all the recent updates, put that on there. Every bullet point should be leadership oriented. There's all sorts of little, acronyms for how to structure these bullet points, always start off each one with like a leadership action oriented verb: spearheaded, led, managed, supervised, drove, impacted. So don't just describe, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but don't just describe what you do at work. Nobody wants to read that shit. They know what a consultant does at Bain or BCG, or pretty damn close to it, right? They want to know what led, what you specifically worked on, who were the clients and who you had to deal with at the client, who did you have to deliver to, why was it so difficult, and what was the eventual impact, not only to the bottom line, but maybe if there are any like cultural changes or, greater opportunities afforded to those who wouldn't have had them. They want to know all that in a bullet point. So good luck with that. That's why maybe you need a consultant. Anyway, but the resumes can be difficult because of what I just said. You have to be concise and try to get that into one bullet point, one line. Now, bullet point can have 3-sentence fragments in it, I suppose. Sometimes you'll end up poking your eyes out trying to make things fit on a page, given all the requirements I just stated. All right, put it in the B school format. What does that mean? Go look up resume book, Wharton MBA, or any other school that you're applying to. Now, you do not change your freaking resume format per school. That is akin to rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It does you no good. Pick one you like, a B school format, and they're all kind of similar. Run with that, right? Pick the one that maximizes the amount of information you can put on there, to be honest with you. Right. So there's, don't pick ones with a gratuitous use of white space along the left side and, keep it all black and white, whatever. Just go Google resume book, or Career Center resume guidance, Career Center resume, PDF, Wharton or Harvard or whatever. You'll find something online. Go in there. Now, you'll always see in these, if it's from a business school, by the way, and I'm getting into the weeds here, you'll always see they put the education first. Don't put the education first. The reason why education's first whenever you see an MBA resume is because that person that you're looking at is still in school. So the most recent experience comes first. Their education would come first because they're still at Wharton or Harvard or Stanford. I digress. So put your work experience first. There should basically only be 3 sections. Work, your name at the top. Okay, great. First section, experience, work experience. Okay, you know what that is. Second section, education, right? And you would put your undergraduate and your graduate degrees. If you got an online certificate at Harvard Extension or some like training course in Microsoft, yada, yada, that does not go in the education section, huh? Surprise, it goes in the last section, which is other or additional. I just like calling it additional. And you can talk about your additional leadership experiences outside of the office, but also your additional training. The reason why you don't put that Harvard Extension stuff in the education section is because it's not on par with your undergraduate or even a graduate degree. Don't do that. It looks lame. I mean, whatever, you can do whatever you want, but it's not the way it's done. All right, now 8A, look at that. I have 2 8As instead of an 8B. Start and finish. So you already opened up your online apps. You read through them in a slide many moons ago or many minutes ago. Now, start completing your online apps, right? And remember, you already know about all those little questions that are going to get you, the little gotcha questions, right? Stanford used to ask, describe yourself in 20 words. Now they have a bunch of optional essays about a time you made an impact based on your background. I think there's at least 2 optional essays. One I think is 1,200 words, and the other one I think is 1,500. Oh, sorry, 1,500 characters and 1,200 characters. Divide that by 6, get about 200 words, 250 words, somewhere in there. Those are nasty essays at the 11th hour, right? But of course, because you watched this presentation and you started those applications, you opened up those applications early and just read through them, you already knew that was coming down the pipe. So no surprises here. Just another day at the office. All right, start completing your online apps. You're going to get asked things like, I'll use Harvard as an example. You're going to get asked things like your reason for leaving a certain job, your reason for when you get to the new job, what was your biggest accomplishment? What was your biggest challenge? Now, here is a common mistake that when I break it down will seem silly, but it's something that happens a lot. You want to cut and paste what's on your resume, your damn good resume that you've polished, into the online form. Do not give them additional bullet points that are not on your resume, because on the online app, they're going to say, describe your work responsibilities, right? And depending on the question, maybe you want to make it into a little bit more of prose or a proper paragraph, but it should be very consistent, completely consistent with what is on, at least not inconsistent with what is on your resume. Just to be clear, I've had clients who initially, before I corrected them, they will write a completely different set of work responsibilities or bullet points into the online app. And the reason why they do that is because they don't want to shut the hell up, basically. They want to tell the admissions committee so much about what they do that they have the resume and it has, 5 bullet points under this one experience, but then they have completely a different set of bullet points because they want to maximize the coverage. They want to spew as much information towards the admissions committee as possible. Think about it this way, from the admissions committee perspective. Whenever you're about to commit a mortal sin like that, consider the admissions committee perspective, which is they're going to look at this and they're going to say, oh my God, it's important enough for Billy or Susie to include on their resume, which I have in front of me in PDF format as part of their application. But somehow that information that's on there is not only not consistent, but it's seemingly not important to include here on the online app. So it's almost like they have 2 different jobs. I mean, they're kind of the same, but if it's so important to include over here, why aren't they including it over there and vice versa? Oh, okay. I guess they just wanted to increase maximum coverage. Now, here's where, beyond what I just told you, the reason why they want you to cut and paste what's on your resume basically into your application is because they want it in their format. Think about it. They're going to review, Harvard reviews like 10, 11,000 applications in a year. Certainly a good percentage of that will be these funky, effed up formats from outer space or from whatever, creative arts program where there'll be color pictures, little emoticons, and they won't know what the hell is going on when they view it. It won't even be in chronological order, right? And so they want it in their format so they can rip through 10,000 applications in a year without going crazy. They need to see every piece of data that they want in the position that they want it. That's their job. Your job is to give it to them like that, right? So always, when there's a debate like this, and I've had to debate these points with my lovely clients, look at the audience, right? It goes back to that first slide we went over earlier in this presentation. All right. Okay, start completing your apps well before the deadline. Okay, got it. Short answer questions. As I mentioned, why'd you leave this job? And it's not because they offered me more money, or it has nothing to do with any disparaging remark or situation at your old place of work that you left. It has everything to do with your new company offered you greater leadership and management responsibility, something like that, right? Not, I hated my boss and he or she hated me. That doesn't fly. So it always has something with the new company or firm or opportunity pulling you into a position of greater responsibility and leadership, as opposed to money or the fact the old job wasn't that great. Now, when they ask you about greatest accomplishment, it can be something like I saved the company a gazillion dollars in a year, right? And so it can be something like a hard stat or number like that. But what I always recommend is being a little more insightful, because they give you a little bit of room. And you would say something like, and I did that I did that as the youngest project manager, as the youngest team member. I did that as someone who was the only person who was the face of the company to the client. And by the way, I ended up reversing a historically adversarial relationship with that client to sell that add-on work and earn my group or the company $1 billion, right? So yeah, you have an easily digestible $1 billion stat up front. This is my clear accomplishment, $1 billion earned or generated. And then beneath that, it's like, yeah, but I did this by being a smart, savvy leader, manager, and by, telling a little bit of a human interest story there, right? The other one is, what was your biggest challenge, right? Think about it this way. A lot of you young whippersnappers on this call or applying to business school, a lot of you are on an accelerated path, especially if, you want to apply to a top business school. You're really kicking ass, taking names, doing really well compared to your peers, let's say, wherever you may be, wherever you work, right? So in the question where they say, what was your biggest challenge? Often you may be the youngest person in the room with your title. Maybe you're not being taken seriously. Maybe they think you're an admin. Depending on industry, country, culture, maybe you may be the only female in the room. Maybe you may be the only person of color in the room. And so all of these things are, so the biggest challenge, this question is much more personal, within reason. And you would say, like, it's basically would be something like, as the youngest and the only woman in the room, in a workplace where all my colleagues, of course, were male, I earned the respect and credibility. I had to earn the respect and credibility of my colleagues in a somewhat inhospitable, not necessarily hostile, but inhospitable environment, right? You're a little bit of a pioneer, the first person there, and that I did, right? And that I did. In fact, I was put on an accelerated path, whatever. I was the only one to get promoted, yada, yada, yada. So that is, a little bit more personal. Now, you don't have to always do that. Maybe you are always the youngest female person of color in the room in some type of male-dominated workplace full of people that are 50 years plus. So you don't want to necessarily beat that same drum again. But if it is, in fact, the most challenging aspect, okay, yeah, maybe you can name it off a couple times, right? I think early on in your career, some of the jobs, it's like not having a technical background or any experience and having to come up to speed with all these other really smart people in my cohort that all graduated from the best schools in my country or whatever, right? And then later it could be, being the youngest female that was left-handed with purple hair in the room. And I had to earn the respect and credibility of my much more male colleagues, for example, or vice versa. So that's it. There's a whole bunch of other ones on there. We could be here forever, but that, again, you will know because you will have started your app before. Let's see. All right. And then finally, and hopefully you can do this a few days before or even a few hours before the deadline, click submit. Now, you may want to have somebody read it over so you can print it to PDF and have somebody read it over. But listen, don't phone it in on your app. And what do I mean by that? Don't make it look like you were rushing to finish it, even if you were. So make sure the punctuation and grammar is correct, right? Like little grammar errors, but, using ampersands when you should be using the word and, things like that look sloppy, right? And the first thing an admissions committee, again, looking at it from their point of view, the first thing they will see are all those data fields. Before they see the essays, before they see the resume, they'll see your first name and all this stuff, right? And so if there's a lot of grammar errors or the grammar is inconsistent with the essays, it looks rushed or sloppy, or maybe two different people worked on this. And so start early, and you really only, like, for the most part, for example, Harvard will ask you what 5 clubs or what are the 5 most important extracurricular activities. First off, you start early, you need to come up with 5. So you can start indexing and thinking early about what 5. I know it's been a few years since undergrad, or the few years since you did something meaningful outside of the office, let's say. And by the way, you can include things inside the office if you are part of like the Young Leadership Committee. Anyway, at Deloitte or wherever. But just start indexing. You'll know they'll all be written out properly. And pretty much all of that data or all of those short answers that you filled out for Harvard are transferable to Stanford, with some exceptions, let's say. And that's it. And then again, I mean, I'm just trying to think here about what an application would ask you before hitting submit. Somewhere on GMAT Club, by the way, I have a post, and I probably should have linked to it, where it says 11th hour application advice, things to consider before you hit submit on that app. So, but here, like, if they ask you something that's strange, it does have a purpose in varying degrees. They will ask you about the highest level of education your father or mother achieved. They'll ask you if you're the first in your family to go to school. So even if your parents have some college, but they never finished, right? Then they didn't actually finish college. It's not really their highest level. So just know, like, it does help you if you are the first, right? First in family to go to school, you know, things like that, right? It doesn't make or break you, but in the very least, if you are putting forth in your essays or somewhere else in your application that you are in fact the first in your family to, let's say, go to college, a 4-year college, not just a technical school, and then you put down that your mom is a managing director at Goldman Sachs, even if she somehow got there because her last name is Goldman Sachs, and, you know, her mom or dad or grandfather or grandmother gave her a job as MD at Goldman Sachs, it just doesn't make sense, right? So you just have to be aware of that. If you say you know, raised in the forest with wolves, but your mom's an MD at Goldman, looks weird, right? So just I don't want to get into the specifics of all that, but just know things have to line up. All right, then that's it. You know, click submit app. Now, you don't have to submit your app weeks before it's due, right? I mean, if it's rolling admissions, early decision like at Columbia or even a Tuck, yeah. If it's rolling admissions, the earlier you submit, the sooner they will review it, and the sooner you'll have an interview invite or not, the sooner you'll get your interview, the sooner you will get your decision. I had a young client one time, worked for a private equity firm out of Miami. He really wanted to go to Columbia. He applied 4 weeks early. They got his app. They contacted him, I think, in 2 or 3 days, right? They must have really wanted him. And he had his interview within a week of applying. He had an interview with an admissions committee person who was going to be in Miami at some conference from Columbia. And I think it was like 10 days, not more than 2 weeks, that he got accepted, right? And that was awesome because that's where he wanted to go. But here's a word of caution. Let's say you're also applying to Harvard and Wharton, Stanford, right? And you're applying to Columbia early decision. Just know that the sooner you would submit your app, the sooner they get back to you and possibly accept you. And if they do accept you, I think you have to pay a $6,500 deposit in US dollars to secure your place early decision. They give you, I don't know, 3-4 weeks to get that money together and send in. Meanwhile, you haven't heard from Wharton or Harvard or Stanford. So if you're qualified or competitive at Wharton, Harvard, Stanford, and, you know, we pretty much know you'd get the interview there, you just wasted a $6,500. You're paying for a $6,500 option, or you just wasted $250 applying to Columbia. So the early bird may get the worm, but you're getting at Columbia, but you're getting the worm at the wrong time, right? So what I would recommend is apply the last day of early decision. They're not going to think, oh, he or she's not really dedicated to coming here. No, you're applying early decision, for God's sake. So what I would say is, listen, you get lost in the sauce a little bit in the mix with all the other hordes of applications coming into Columbia on the last day of the early decision. It'll take a little while for them to get through. But if you're competitive at Columbia. But most of all, you will know by the time they probably get to an interview and you have to make a decision whether or not you have interviews at Harvard, Wharton, Stanford. And if you have interviews at 2 out of 3 of those schools, or 3 out of 3 of those schools, or even if you just have the interview at Wharton, I would say, oh man, how much cash do you have to burn in your bank account? But if you're really nervous and you want that option, okay, commit to Columbia, and yes, interview at Wharton and see how it pans out, right? But you're pretty much going to Columbia at that point, unless Wharton comes up with something very compelling, right? Or you burn $6,500. But let's say Wharton comes through, and again, I'm getting in the nuance here and I'm rambling. If Wharton comes through at the end, you paid for a $6,500 option at Columbia. And I know this from experience, they have no recourse. If you email them respectfully telling them that, you know, you're not going to come in the fall, and that's it, Columbia emails you back, and I know this from experience, and they say, okay, thank you, we're taking your name off the list, or thank you, but not thank you really, we're taking your name off the list. That's it. Very short, to the point, perhaps even terse email, right? But still professional to the point, right? That's not the case at all schools. Duke is very different. They like try to maybe come after you or whatever. I've seen this from personal experience. So if anybody from Duke is listening to this, Fuqua, I know I have the email. Anyway, so so if Wharton's going to interview you, did well in that team-based discussion, which is a completely different presentation, then, you're probably going to get in. Wharton gives you compelling offer. Okay, whatever. But just most of my point, besides the rambling like an old man, which I am, is you got to watch the timing on some of these early decisions when you hit submit apps. So going back to my original point, remember that one a few minutes ago? There may not be any benefit to you submitting your app really early with a rolling decision. But beyond that, my friends who are maybe still listening to this call, there is no benefit to, you don't have to wait till the last hour or the last minute to submit your Harvard app. But you don't, if you get it done in 2 weeks early, a lot of people say, I just want to submit, I just want to get it done. Okay, you know what? Fine, do it. I don't recommend it. I'll never recommend it because there may be an answer or something you learn in the subsequent 2 weeks before the deadline that you really would want to change. You can't undo, you can't unring the bell, as they say. Too late, you submitted. That's it, right? So what's the point? It's other than to feel a sense of some fleeting sense of accomplishment. Don't do it. It's only nerves. Listen to me, Paul. I know what I'm saying. All right. That is pretty much it. I mean, okay. And then after you submit your app, by the way, and I probably should include another slide. Maybe this is for another presentation. Folks, keep engaging the school. I know you have other apps to submit, so go ahead and do that. That's the priority. But after you're done, let's say round 2 apps, it's the middle or late in January, keep reaching out to these schools. Keep indexing or taking an inventory of the things that the people that you've been having conversations with and reaching out. If you feel like your GPA is a little low, maybe you took some class, but keep going after leadership experiences at work, of course. Just start building bullet points for a potential waitlist letter. So let's see, Harvard waitlists you, or whatever school you need. And if the school takes updates, and Harvard does now, they used to not take updates from the waitlist. You want to have, 500 words worth of updates, meaningful updates, not bullshit. But you can fill up half of a full page, 250 words, let's say, of an update letter with, this is how I've continued to engage your community, learn more about it. This is how I feel like I'm an even better candidate than the person whose application you've got in round 1 or 2, right? So keep building that, that army of bullet points that you're going to probably eventually need to bring to the table at some of the more competitive schools if you're on the bubble, or if it's just a really competitive year, right? Consider the shockwave that COVID has caused. It pushed, I think we're mostly through it with respect to business school wait lists and unpredictability, but you saw that so many people deferred it, like a Harvard or a Wharton especially, that clients that I knew should have been getting into Wharton in round 1 of this year were getting waitlisted, and then they got in round 2. But the lesson learned is keep engaging the school, keep doing all the things that show them you want to be a part of their community, and that if they call you from the waitlist, without a moment's hesitation, you will accept, right? And you even want to state that in your waitlist update letter. They call you on that same call, you're going to say, yes, let's get married, right? I'm coming to West Philly. So there's no doubt, because the last thing an admissions committee wants to do when they open up your folder, if they don't see anything, no updates, nothing substantial, they're going to move on to the next person, because the person with the updates, they know wants to win. I mean, they know wants to go to the school. So they know if they call that person, they will accept. They don't want to keep extending invitations to people who will not accept, because it screws with their rankings. And beyond that, it gives the admissions committee so much uncertainty and rework throughout the process. Just adds more noise, not signal. All right, folks, let's see. Next slide here. Oh, look, questions. Let's see here. Oh, wow. All right, so I guess I'll start. Whoa, there's a lot of questions here. Okay. Sushi Ayer, sir, I got a 715 in my GMAT and having a 2.5 years of experience. Any chances I can get into Michigan, Tuck, UCLA, Booth, B school? Okay, well, I'm going to be very honest with you here. I might even sound like a little bit of a jerk, but Mr. Sushi, okay, I don't necessarily know too much about your personal demographics, we'll say, or geography, but generally speaking, you want to hit the average for the school, right? If there aren't a lot of you at a B school, whether that's race, gender, industry, yada, yada, right-handed or left-handed, you may be able to get away with having 10, maybe 20 points below the average. But you have, so 715 would be about there. But if you're from an overrepresented demographic, and let's say you're an IT project manager, then, and let's say your school undergrad's not that great, and maybe GPA is not that strong. It's not from a top tier school from, you know, whatever country you may be from, Canada, let's say, then you need to start upping, you know, putting that GMAT score on steroids a little bit, right? Basically, for every question more you get right, you get 10 more points, right? If you can get above a 750, that's where I see my clients usually getting money, big money, 25, 35, $100,000. Okay. 2.5 years of experience. I have no idea as to what the nature of that experience is. Are you sweeping the floors? Are you running your own business? What are you doing? Are you an accelerated path? Things like that. So what's my point, my friend? It all depends, as any good economist may say, but again, you know, any chance you can get a Michigan, Tuck, UCLA, or Booth Business School, I would say rewatch this entire presentation, go look at LinkedIn and see how well do you stack up. You can answer your own question with much more certainty and specificity than I can, given what I know. You know yourself, you know your resume, go look on LinkedIn, find a critical mass of individuals who graduated from Ross or Anderson or Booth that have your background, of course, Tuck. All right. I didn't know you could get a score in multiple. Okay. How do you find some alumni or B school adcoms to connect with? Okay, so remember, going back, I forgot what slide that was. Let me go back here. So, okay, it was this one. Okay, first thing everybody should do in the next few weeks, go read the admissions committee website for your target schools. Look for something called like an ambassador program, an outreach program, speak to current students, right? Most top business schools will have that. Tap that, do it early. Okay. And that's it, email them and then go from there. And so they'll probably reach out to you. Maybe they're busy, maybe whatever. But then again, like, you know what you're interested in. You know what clubs you could possibly be a part of at each school. Start emailing those individuals, right? And work your way on down from there. Again, look to see if somebody went to your undergraduate school that's now at Tuck or Ross or Harvard or wherever. Hit that person. People who used to work where you work, right? People who work now where you work that graduated from these schools. So you know, I mean, here, slide number 7, right there, lucky number 7. All right, how important is your age compared to the other student profile? Okay, I mean, if you're, once you start getting past like 31, 32, that's when you really, they try to push you into the executive MBA programs, right? You have a little more gray hair or a little less hair. And they try to start funneling you into like part-time programs or executive programs, whatever, you know, maybe not a part-time program because you're not local. But at a bare minimum, I would say if you have 2.5 years of experience, like Sushi, whose question I tried to address a few minutes ago, that is what I would say is the floor, like 2 years for any top business school program. Once you start, you know, if you're 28, 29, 30, that's when you really need to like start humping, right? Get your ass in gear, start applying, do it. Because think about it. You know, it's like why, if somebody, there's other people getting in, and it depends on the industry, but people with 2 or 3 years of experience are getting into these top MBA programs. Why on earth do you need 7? Okay, maybe you have some non-traditional route, or you had to join the military, you had to go on a 2-year mission trip, something like that, right? Maybe a family issue. But as long as you can address why you may be a little older than the average or the norm in an optional essay, if it's even an issue, then you'll be cool, right? Then you'll be fine. So I would say out of all of the factors, your age is probably one of the more minor factors, right? They're looking for experience in leadership and things like that, right? One or less than 2 years, less than 18 months. Okay, maybe you don't have enough experience to have a good resume and talk about leadership and have had impact. But then once you get a little too old. It's like, what's the deal with this person? Why are they, it's kind of like shit or get off the pot, right? Like what's taking this guy or gal so long, right? And you could have very good circumstances that are completely reasonable. Okay. That's why you want to fill out the optional essay. So Abdullah, like, email me mba@amerasiaconsulting.com. That's mba@amerasiaconsulting.com. Just let me know, give me some insight into your personal, were you young, you high, what's the deal, right? And I'll tell you how to handle it. How do you find these emails, LinkedIn? Okay, it's a very good question. Mr. Whatevs. How do you find these emails, LinkedIn? This is tricky. Okay, so usually if you go to these club, so on LinkedIn, if you have a LinkedIn account, you can contact these people. Just reach out to them like, sup, what's up, man? I mean, a little bit more professional than that. But you can go to these club websites, and often they'll have the officer list there. And they'll have, I think, what's that one website? Campusgroups.com. You'll find email addresses on there. But in general, you can kind of decipher this may sound a little suspect, but you can kind of decipher what their email addresses are. If you know it's joe.blow at, mba.kellogg.edu, well, then what do you think, right? And it should only take you a few tries to figure out what that is. Now, that may be cyber stalking, but it's really not. Just give it a shot. The worst that's going to happen is they ignore you. You're not going to go on some admissions blacklist, right? So just do it. Listen, you got to be resourceful here. Go to the web pages. Maybe you can email the general club email list. On LinkedIn, maybe you can message them. Campusgroups.com. You might be able to find some stuff there. But I shit you not. Like if you Google their first and last name and kellogg.edu or whatever the domain name is for a school, you'll not only find a little exposés, blog posts, articles about these people, but eventually their email address will pop up. Even before you even email them with an email address that you kind of deciphered, Google that email address, joe.blow@mba.kellogg.edu. See if there's any hits. If they come up, boom, you're in business, right? And then email them. You don't have to tell them where you got it or where you got it, right? They don't need to know how they make the sausage. All right. Peony Lee, is this being recorded to be uploaded another time? Yes, it is. It will be on GMAT Club's YouTube channel. Whatever says yes. Thanks, whatever. All right. Yes, okay, man, I should probably scroll down. All right. You can watch it. Okay. Shwarali says, any tips for deferred enrollment 2+2 program? Okay. So that's HBS 2+2, right? Which is a program where you can be, I think, a college junior, senior. Yale has one. A bunch of schools now have one. Booth has one. But it's like this early entry program. So you apply while you're still in undergrad. And then when they accept you, you have to go work someplace for 2 years or even 3 years. They're flexible somewhat. And then you do 2 years at Harvard or whatever school, right? That's the general idea. So any tips? I mean, from what I've seen, you have to be at the top of your game there. I mean, you really have to have strong reasons as to why now is the right time. I mean, why wouldn't you wait and then apply, right? You have to answer that question, why it's so important that you need to go now, like how you know you need to go now. And this may sound like very general, glib advice. I would have to know your individual circumstances. But what sometimes the general argument is in your essays and why the 2+2 deferred enrollment format is that getting the acceptance to a Harvard or Yale or whatever early on now gives you 2 years or 3 years to explore whatever it is that you want. And that may sound like, really? So I can go join the clown as a rodeo or something? No, you can't do that. But if there is an opportunity for you to go join a startup, family company, whatever, start your own thing, you can literally tell Harvard in the essay that getting an acceptance now. So I have all the raw leadership characteristics. I've done well as an undergraduate. I've had an impact. I've changed this, I've changed that. But, I don't want to fall into the trap of consulting or banking or these very traditional feeder industries. I have an opportunity. I like taking risks. I want to possibly even fail. I want to learn on my own merits. I don't want to be constrained by anything that even resembles what I may think I have to do according to the world to get into HBS, right? I want to unleash. And getting into 2+2 now affords me that to take big, bold risks, to really go for the gold, to reach for the stars, right? And learn so many more lessons than I would had I not done that and just joined Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or whatever, right? So that's the deal. That's kind of the idea. I can give more specifics if you email me at MBA@AmerasiaConsulting.com. All right, next, Divya, how personal can we get in our application essay? It's a very good question, Divya. All right, so it depends on how relevant it is. You never want to come across as a disingenuous narrator, right? And what that means is a bullshitter. Okay, I'll give you an example here. I'll borrow an example from a client. I had a client from India who got into Harvard, and when she was a young girl, she was in a car accident with her father, who passed away. And if anyone here is from India, probably knows better than me, but she was raised by a single mother, and there was a lot of social stigma associated with that, as well as poverty. You're almost guaranteed poverty to a certain extent, at least coming from her family in her part of the country, right? India is like many different little countries in one. That's what I've learned over the last 15 years. So, but here's the thing. So she didn't dwell on, and then her mom sends her to live with her relatives because the mom wanted her to have a normal family upbringing experience, not one full of misery and and depraved. So initially when people are writing their first drafts, what I see is that they tend to be way into the gory, bloody details. I mean, literally. And you don't need to do that. Just think about it this way. If you're in a car accident when you're a young girl, 7, 8 years old, whatever it may be, and you see your father pass away in front of you, you don't need to describe every minute of that experience. It's horrible. It is gut-wrenching. The admissions committee gets it. In fact, the admissions committee would appreciates it when you say, I was 8, I got into a car accident, my father passed away right in front of my eyes, and ever since then, my life was not the same. That's all you need to say. You don't need to give the play-by-play narrative as if you're calling, a sports game or event, no disrespect, about that, right? It becomes irrelevant, and you start to wander into the territory of being full of shit, right? Even if you're not, that's the tragedy. So what's more important is how it impacted you, what you did with it, how it affected your view of the world, your behaviors, your subsequent life, your lessons learned. You get all of that. That's what's most important. So don't dwell on that. I mean, just imagine this. The Harvard admissions committee read 10, 11,000 essays a year. D. Leopold, the old admissions director before Chad Losey, used to give specific guidance. And I know she wrote this because I know her personality. And it says, don't overthink, overcraft, or overwrite. Just say what you want to tell us in the most direct, straightforward, simple way possible. And I've heard her other times say, this is not a creative writing contest. And boy, does she mean it, right? Most people think that's gratuitous, but that is a lady, God bless her, that is super straightforward. And most admissions committee people are like her. They just don't want to read it. So how personal, if you're describing, so getting back to your question, Divya, if personal to you means describing the bloody details and it doesn't necessarily support the point, which is about lessons learned and what you took away from it and how it affected you later in your point of the view and your maturity and, how you may have been, had to grow up fast and your relationship with your mom and the rest of the family, they get that a car accident's horrible, end it, period, right? Focus. Don't make them cut through the Amazon rainforest with a rusty and bloody butter knife to get to the real content, which is not what happened to you, but how it affected your thoughts and your subsequent actions, right? You do not want to delay getting to that. And that is what, again, D. Leopold, the old HBS head of admissions used to say, don't stop bullshitting, right? Except she probably can't say that. So anyway, of course it depends on the essay question, right? So, yeah, I mean, this is a whole multi-hour conversation, but I would say it's not a creative writing contest, and you'd be surprised how little doom and gloom or stuff like that they want to see, right? Listen, I've had another client got into Harvard, and I remember when I started working with her, a different client, she did not want to talk about a bad relationship that she had during her undergrad. She wasn't supposed to have a boyfriend. She ended up getting one. The guy ended up being kind of nuts, like telling her, what do I mean by that? Stalking her, telling her what to wear, what to eat, who she could study, where she could study, how much she could study. It was crazy, right? She was miserable. Her grades tanked. She couldn't get an internship. And then she just said, F this. And she started taking matters into her own hands. And then the rest is history, right? Now, in the beginning, she had a lot of concerns. My client had a lot of concerns about, she doesn't want to sound like the abused, battered woman, right? And I'm totally understand. And she's absolutely right, right? And so she didn't even want to talk about it though. And I told her, I said, my client, I said, you only talk about things as much as necessary. So we don't have to assassinate this guy, but they want to know if we're telling a story here about how you had to overcome an obstacle, right? How you had to dig yourself out of a grave, so to speak, right? You want to pitch the valley low and you want to take responsibility for it, right? The circumstances that you're in. Yeah, it was related. That guy certainly had your crazy psycho boyfriend. He had a lot to do with it, right? But at the same time, you have to own it in the essay, or you have to internalize it. It's almost like, I don't want to say she said she let that guy do it, but she said listen, I made a mistake. I wasn't supposed to have a boyfriend. I did. I lied to my parents or didn't tell them the truth, a lie of omission. I didn't reveal it when I should have. I have to own those things. I created a situation that I felt like I could not extract myself from until one day he did something really, really shitty, whatever that would be. And she's like, F it, I had enough. I don't care if I get kicked out of school. I don't care what rumors you spread. I don't care who you send after me. Go to hell, don't talk to me. And it may be inappropriate for a quote unquote girl to do this on campus here, but I don't care. Watch me, right? And she brought it up to the admin, whatever, right? So it's if she had gone on and on and on about what he told her to eat every Tuesday or Wednesday, or what to wear, what colors, and she just droned on and on and on about that, right? The focus is not on her accepting whatever responsibility she can. And I don't mean that it was her fault. What I mean is that she has to think about her actions in all of this, right? Whatever that may be. So, because this essay is actually about her, it's not about him, right? And she got through it in the beginning. I remember we started with a whole bunch of information in the beginning about this guy and what was going on. And we cut it down to, I think, 3 or 4 sentences, right? And she moves on because, again, the most important thing is how that affected her and how she begins to take command of her life and the outcomes and who she's going to be. And she's done letting other people define that for her, right? And so that was an incredibly powerful and personal essay, appropriately personal essay, because then she talks about redeeming herself and how she raised her grade point average a whole point, whatever, right? And how she graduated with a great job and what she learned from all of this. And it wasn't yeah, I got a great job making money, but was more like, I am woman, hear me roar. And more importantly, since my first year on campus and all the things I got involved with, opened up opportunities for people who, especially young women on campus, who would not have had those opportunities, who would have been relegated to the periphery, to support roles and not leadership roles, who essentially would have been told what they can be and what they can do by virtue of their gender on this campus, in this culture, in this country, right? And so 90% of that essay, 95, was all about her evolution in thought and in deed and in perspective, and how at the end of her graduation she had left her impact on campus and how she could march forward from that. And the bottom line at the end was, she could look back and see how her challenges had really transformed her and made her into, Susie 2.0, right? It had transformed her. And she saw the inherent value of challenges. And even though they were super freaking painful, in molding her and evolving her. And ever since that day, she left campus, she looked for the most challenging. She obviously wasn't looking for psycho boyfriends. Maybe that's every man on earth. I don't know. But she was looking for the most challenging environment possible, right? And that's why she went to this place. That's why she assumed this role. That's why when the learning curve flattened, she went to another role, even though she had established herself as the #1 stunner superhero at her former place of work. She still entered a new environment. So getting back to your original question, and is that it's how personal can you get? As personal as is relevant, and not anything else beyond that. Don't make them roll their eyes, Divya. I know you won't after this conversation, but they've seen it all, and they've seen it all executed poorly. All right. Divya asks, also, can we switch our job while we are applying to colleges? Okay. Maybe. This is what I would say. I always tell my clients this, and I'm telling you this. Pretend like you're not applying to business school when you have to. So if you have a great opportunity at Sequoia, India or somewhere, right? Some hotshot job, wherever you may be. Maybe you're in San Francisco. I don't know. Go for it, right? You want to have all options on the table, which includes business school. So separate those lives, bifurcate it, chop it in half. Divya #1 is applying to business school, the top programs, whatever, right? She's not really revealing her hand to anybody at work, whether she's going to go to business school or leave or whatever. Divya #2, they coexist, is going after that ultimate job and recognizing that if she gets that job, she may have to spend another 2 years there working, or she won't get a recommendation, or she'll burn bridges, or she'll really miss out on a super awesome, fun, terrific, impactful experience in her life, right? So let's say that new opportunity is what people post MBA are gunning for, then I would say, F it, like go for it, right? And then let's say you get into Harvard or Stanford or Wharton, and let's say you get a job at Sequoia Capital. What I would say is evaluate it then. Do you want to leave Sequoia? And the answer is probably no, to be honest with you. Then you would write to Harvard or Stanford or Wharton and respectfully ask for a deferral. Maybe they'll give it to you, right? And we can get into the good reasons for that. But just separate and go after each one. Don't say, I'm not going to pursue Sequoia, India, or whatever it may be because I'm applying to business school. What happens if business school doesn't work out? Let's say you only get into Kellogg and you think you could have gotten into Wharton or Harvard or Stanford, right? It's like, we don't know. So have all options on the table, and you're going to have to build a wall in the middle to keep these things straight, right? Now, you also have to consider whether or not you want to disclose to the new employer that you're applying to business school. If you're not going to get the job because of it, my opinion, and this is just my advice, this isn't even advice, this is my assessment. I'll say this because I'm not going to tell you what to do on this one because you're an adult. Use your best judgment. But if you're not going to get that, why, if you don't know if you're going to get into a Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, why tell them you're going to go to business school? So if you already had the offer and you were trying to get this job and you were planning on leaving, I would tell them. But if you don't even know whether or not you're going to get into business school, why bring it up? You don't even go for the freaking job interview because you're probably not going to get it, right? So let's say, a few months from now, you have the job, you have an offer from Harvard or whatever other business school you want to go to, then call me, we can discuss, right? Then, there will be some difficult decisions you'll have to make, but ultimately you, Divya, have all the options. And this is all about you. I don't want to sound like self-centered or whatever, you're shitting on other people or something. It's not it at all. Divya, you have to do Divya, right? Meaning don't handicap yourself. Don't make assumptions that may not pan out, which handicap your opportunities other place else, right? Do them both. You have everything on the table, then make your decisions. That's the position always in life you want to be in, right? And you'll work it out from there. Maybe more difficult because you're going to hurt people's feelings and somebody may, throw a stapler at you, but yeah, that whatever, you get it. All right. Oh, by the way, if you're switching jobs, Divya, make sure it's consistent with what you're doing now. So no, don't join the circus, right? So it's okay to job hop, even changing jobs every year, every 2 years, if you are, it's consistent, right? You went from Deloitte to Accenture, Bain to McKinsey, or Bain to a private equity firm, Bain private equity to a legit private equity firm, to Sequoia, whatever, right? If that's even possible, that is perfect pre-MBA, right? Or even the first two things, Bain PE group in India, let's say, to whatever, private equity firm, or even Sequoia for that matter. Lightspeed, the names. All right. Abhishek says, while applying, the work experience in years should be More related to technical side or related to nonprofit? Oh, okay. So, okay. So you're kind of presenting me with a little bit of a false choice, right? Like a false paradigm here. So you're not thinking the right way, in other words. So Abhishek, my friend, it doesn't matter if you're working for a nonprofit or if you're working for, you know, some whatever engineering firm, right? What matters is the amount of leadership experience. Now you want whatever to be a traditional feeder. So I'd say if you had to earn more, I would be on the more business technical side and not the nonprofit side, because it's harder for you to make a case that because you're working at the fuzzy pet rescue, no-kill rescue center, that you need an MBA. Why don't you go to some other type of program if you even need to go to business school at all, right? Unless you want to start selling the animals, and then maybe, you know, you do need a business degree. I'm kidding. But it should be more on the businessy technical side. Now, that does not let you off the hook, though, for demonstrating whether a leadership experience. So that's whether you're on the technical business side or you're working at a, you know, nonprofit. Across either one, you have to demonstrate the leadership and management impact, you know, responsibility and impact, even if you don't have the title. And by the way, I didn't mention this earlier. I should have. Leadership is not a title, folks. Leadership is often being the low man or low woman, the most junior, the least experienced in the room, but having an outsized impact, stepping up to assume more authority and doing that, even though you don't have a team officially reporting to you, even though you have to work with a bunch of old dudes, guys and gals, right? It's all those soft leadership examples that these schools want. Because let's face it, most people won't have a director or manager title, and you don't need one. You don't even want one, because when you have a high title, first of all, it seems a little out of place. Why do you need business school? But it's like when you tell people to jump, they say how high. It's much harder if you're the noob, right? The newbie, and you go in there and you got to make shit happen or you fix stuff, dealing with a bunch of people who have much higher titles. That, my friends, is leadership. All right, getting back to Abhishek. So I guess maybe I answered your question, but it should be more related to technical or nonprofit. Okay, I would say, listen, technical, businessy side, but overall leadership. Now, look at the industry that you work in, the company that you work for, then start looking on LinkedIn or the Career Center webpage for these schools. Do they send people to business school? What business schools and how many numbers, right? All right. Siddharth says, any top tips for applicants from an overrepresented demographic India, but non-traditional work experience? Your family business. So, okay, on paper, I mean, listen, Indian male, yes, sure. From India, not from California. That, yes, by the raw numbers, overrepresented demographic. You probably have to get 20 points above the GMAT average, things like that, right? But here's the thing, though. Within that whole group that you're competing against, you're not competing against somebody who works at the, a purple, left-handed, animal from the no-kill nonprofit world, right? You're dealing with just those guys, basically, from India who went to top schools and whatever. And so within that demographic, the hardest part or section to be in is if you work in IT, more or less, right? Just kind of, or a middle office role. But that's not you. So when they start looking at you, Indian males, you're going to have something more to offer, right? So they're going to start looking at you more as not of, as another Indian dude from India. They're going to start looking at you, okay, family business. What position? How big is the company? How has he grown it? And of course, some of your stats, but, is he going to go back? Because a lot of times they worry about Indian males, let's say, are overrepresented demographics because there's simply too many for what can come out the back end, what recruiters can absorb, what companies can hire, especially as an international, right, with the visa issues and these things, right? So there's only so much you can place in the end, right? And this is beyond like, okay, you can't have everybody in a classroom be an Indian male, right? But if they would be, if you just looked at test scores, perhaps. So you got to have that diversity as well, diversity of thought, background. Okay, you get that. But yeah, recruiters can't absorb it on the back end. But Siddharth, if you're saying that you're going to go back to your family company, that, you have to assume the reins, maybe mom's going to retire, dad's going to retire, maybe you're the eldest, whatever, then you are now putting yourself in a different bucket. You're competing against And it's a small number of people, granted, but you're competing against the family business owners, the entrepreneurs, people of that nature. So you want to make sure it's a substantial sized business. I mean, I'm not talking about Reliance, right? Our favorite Indian family company. I'm talking about, I don't know, a few $1,000,000 a year. It just depends, right? I'd have to know more about the details, but you're going to have to, yeah, it's like, you're going to make a good case. You don't worry about necessarily being thrown in there, right? You got to do all the things right, like get a high GMAT score, right? Um, but your plan post MBA goal is so rock solid, they're not going to worry about you. Your money in the bank, so to speak, right? So whatever you want to do for your internship, that's fine. But you're going back, you're going to run the whole thing, and that's it, right? So I'd be very interested to learn more about this specific company and its size, what you guys do. Email me. You have the email address on the presentation. All right, so cut through the, yeah. All right, Shaz, will there be any difference in jobs getting after B school, US B schools, with 3 years versus 4 years of work experience before joining B school? I mean, again, Shaz, like, it depends on what you're actually doing now. So if you work at, let's say BCG in India, as an example, it's a company known in India for being a tough place to work, a little bit of a meat grinder, right? A month full of Sundays in a week, right? It's just jam-packed full of stuff. It's kind of brutal as compared to Bain India or McKinsey India, right? And so what I've seen with my own clients who are getting into Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, because, and again, it depends on the essay that's being asked and all stuff, but they're 3 years, it seems to me, and no disrespect towards Bain India or anything else, and I know if somebody's from Bain India or whatever on this call, they're going to be like, you know what Paul said? Did you hear what he said? Listen, just for the sake of the example, for all you Bainies on the call. But what I would say is that, it's if you have a really chock full experience at a BCG India compared with the competing companies, then you're 2 or 3 years. You can make the argument based on reputation and what you detail in your essays and on your resume that you're 2 years, especially if you've been promoted and you're up for early promotion, yada, 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 or the only person promoted when they weren't promoting anybody. You can say and have a strong case. Also, your recommendations can definitely back this up. This is why recommendations are so important, that you've achieved so much and done so much and assumed so much responsibility and had so much impact that your 2 years is essentially 3-4 years at some other place, right? At a lesser person's workplace. So, there's my answer. All right, Divya, that's what I meant. Yeah, it's impact. Thanks a lot. You're welcome. Divya says, do business schools look at the job switch as a sign of not being serious? No, not if it's in the same industry. If it's clearly, Divya, a better job, meaning not necessarily more money, more responsibility, okay, maybe a higher title, maybe higher money, more responsibility, more leadership, more opportunity for you to grow, more challenges, right? A bigger cauldron that you're going to dive into, a bigger lava pool, bigger opportunity to impact. And granted, you've only been there a short while at a time because you just joined. So, it has to be realistic, the amount of impact you could have. But if they see that, then make the switch. Then it's okay. It's consistent with the story that you're trying to paint about who you are. You fueled by challenges. You seek them out. And if you've been at your current company, learning curve is kind of flattening, and there's not as many opportunities there anymore. You don't have to say that in your app or essays or anything like that. But if you've kind of mastered that domain, then screw it, move on. Right? It has. As long as it's consistent with the industry, more or less. And listen, I've had people switch from consulting to VC in India, and they've gotten into Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, all those top schools. So it just has to be consistent, right? All right. So, not serious about admission. Yeah, as if you're trying to find yourself or something. No, they won't. Just be consistent and make sure it's a position of higher authority. I may be applying to MBA, but I'm afraid of my mom. Yeah, me too. And I'm probably much older than you. I'm scared of my mom. Okay, yeah, I work at Amazon. All right, folks. It seems like I've answered all questions, right? 2 hours and 8 minutes or 9 minutes in, but all right, folks. Email me. You have the email address there. Let me do the right thing and go to the last slide. Email me. You can email me at gmatclub@amerasiaconsulting.com, MBA@amerasiaconsulting.com. If you do email me, please reference this conversation, reference what I said, or if I promised you something, or if I said we could talk about this, just so it puts me right away into, a time and a place. Great. I'm glad, honestly, I'm glad everybody got something out of this. That's my point. And I look forward to hearing from you. And please get on GMAT Club or YouTube, watch my other GMAT Club presentations. I think you will find they're not your average presentation. I don't mean to brag, but I try to go as deep as possible into Harvard, Stanford, Wharton essays, whatever, right? If you need an admissions consultant, okay, of course, ring me up. I still have availability for round one. So there's some other people on my team here. And in the very least, let's spend an hour on the phone and figure out how we can help or what you need to do. All right, folks, thank you for attending. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go get a drink of water. I'll talk to everybody later. Bye-bye.